I just want to go back to Tracy's question. Where you talked about if the property is sold during the term of the lease, can we give the tenant notice 20 days as per the owner's instructions? I just want to make sure that I wasn't too short at answering that. What I'm going to do, though, this is a matter that I think needs to be fully debated. I'm going to see if I can get a panel of attorneys and set up a Q&A. And what I'm thinking of doing is creating a session where we talk about how can the landlord cancel a fixed term lease. Then we can ask all of these questions to them and we can have more than one opinion. But my understanding was that there was a specific case that they were dealing with Expello, who deals with the breach management and the eviction matters that Ishmael was dealing with. And I might be putting words in his mouth and I might be getting things wrong, but I believe that there was a specific instance where it turned out we couldn't do it because, or they couldn't do it rather, because of this situation. So that's my only caution there. So I'm going to say that as far as I'm concerned, probably the proper answer to give you, Tracy, and my apologies if I was very brief, is that I still see this as a gray area. Because I don't know if it's been tested in court, and that's where lawyers become useful. So I'm going to see if I can put together an information session where we talk specifically about when a landlord can cancel a lease, a fixed term lease, on what basis, and then we ask these specific questions, including your question. So that, I think, is what I will do. And I don't think I would be able to facilitate a group of lawyers, but I will talk to Elise and see if she can help me with that. So maybe we'll try and do something like that, because I think it is something that does need clarification. Tracy, it is hier gat voorkoop. Unless both parties agree. That is essentially the bottom line. You're quite right, Tracy. It's hier gat voorkoop, and as far as I know, there's no exceptions to hier gat voorkoop. But because it is in a lot of lease agreements, the perception has been created that it is enforceable, and I'm told that it is in all likelihood not enforceable. So I think it would be worthwhile. I think it would be worthwhile to get some opinions on that. So let me work on that, and I'm just going to put your name here, Tracy. Let me get working on that, and let's see if we can create an information session where we talk specifically, not only on that one, but about why and how, and let the lawyers explain it to us. But my understanding is no, but in my head it's still a gray area, and maybe my head is wrong. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, still, and then we're just going to run through quickly the resources that are available to you, simply for the cost of a review. Calculating and billing the cancellation penalty. I'm going to get to a real example, because this is when when things get a bit complicated. So non-domiso, you're probably going to get the answer here. So early cancellation notice. Let's forget about what month this is. Let's just accept my calendar is for real. So on the 17th of month 1, the tenant says, I am exercising my right. They don't have to say all these things. They're just saying, I'm giving you 20 business days notice that I will be leaving the property on blah, blah, blah date. So they give it to us on Wednesday, the 17th. Now we start, remember, it has to be 20 business days. Now we start counting. Business day 1, 2, blah, 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 and we get to business day 9. Now we run over to the next month, and we go to business day 10, blah, 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 and we get to business day 20. Business day 20 is now what's referred to in the Act as the date of cancellation. The date of cancellation. So when it says the tenant remains liable for all costs up until the date of cancellation, this is the date of cancellation. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, if there's public holidays in here, I know sometimes I'm stating the obvious, but I just want to be clear, then you have to skip those. And this time of year is very, very thing. So any rents and other payments due under the lease may only be billed up to the date of cancellation. So the very first thing you have to do is reverse any rent billing post the date of cancellation. So so you must make sure that you don't send out a full rent statement over here. You're going to make that the date of cancellation. Okay, so you don't bill rent after cancellation. So you ensure you're not billing for rent, etc., after the date of cancellation, utilities, all that sort of stuff. Now, then you diarize to bill the cancellation penalty if need be. But as out of that explanation that I gave on Domiso, until you re-tenant the property, you can't really calculate this cancellation penalty because you don't know how long it's going to be vacant. Okay? Once the property is reconfirmed, re-tenanted, then we can finalize the deposit refund. So we will retain the deposit on the basis of until we can determine basically the cancellation penalty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, last month we were fortunate in our rental training club to have Ishmael on because he mentioned to me that there's been some recent updates and indications in the decisions of the Rental Housing, sorry, not the Rental Housing Act, the Rental Housing Tribunal, regarding cancellation penalties. So I want to update you on these. These are just updates, okay? So basically, let me just get all my little things. If you specify a cancellation penalty that is a rand value in your lease, in other words, or something that can be converted to a rand value. I don't want to go into this in too much detail, okay? But if you specify a cancellation penalty that is a rand value or can be converted to a rand value in your lease, for example, my cancellation penalty is equivalent to 2 months. Oh, sorry, that should be rent, not notice. I don't know what's going on with my head. To 2 months rent. And the property has not been re-tenanted by the day the exiting tenant leaves. So let's go back to the example. This is new information that he shared with us in the rental training club last month. So anybody who's not in the rental training club, you may want to join because these are the things we covered there. So if you specify a cancellation penalty that can be converted to a rand value, so for example, a penalty equivalent to 2 months rent, and the property has not been re-tenanted by the day the exiting tenant leaves. So let's go back to my example. I've given notice, I'm going to leave. I've given early termination notice, I'm going to leave on the 15th of April. The landlord uses their best endeavors to re-tenant the property. There is no tenant on the 16th of April. Then my understanding is that because the property was not immediately tenanted, that full cancellation penalty can be paid to the landlord on that first vacant day, being the 16th. Sonia, I think you were on that training, but this was my understanding. But you will need to update your lease for this. What I am going to do as an additional bonus, ladies and gentlemen, is I am going to give you also a link to the recording of this webinar. Now, because this is not something I've dealt with much because we only got this update in the last month from Ishmael. So essentially, if your lease says our cancellation penalty is 2 months rent, and the property gets tenanted immediately, there is no downtime. Okay, it gets tenanted immediately from the date after the leaving tenant leaves, then no cancellation penalty is permissible. But I understand that from recent indications or recent decisions from the Rental Housing Act, at least in Cape Town, because Ishmael works in Cape Town, at least in Cape Town, is that if you do not get the property re-tenanted immediately, then that cancellation penalty, as specified in your lease agreement, can be billed immediately and deducted from the rental deposit, so that you can then sort out and finalize and disperse your rental deposit. But you will need to make sure that you update your lease agreement, and that's something I need to ask Ishmael about. So once again, I will give you the recording of that webinar. The first half of that recording is me basically going over the requirements of the Rental Housing Act, okay? Not the Rental Housing Act, the Consumer Protection Act. But in the second half, Ishmael will be explaining everything. So I will be sharing that with you as a bonus, as part of this training, so that you can get the absolute most up-to-date information. Tracy, my understanding, okay, so what Tracy has said here is, say you get someone from 1 May, then surely you can charge the balance of April as a penalty. Tracy, my understanding of this, and this was what I was clear on, okay, and that's why I'm going to share this recording with you so you can hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. My understanding was we can finalize if the property is vacant and your lease makes provision for a specific amount, not minimums, maximums, not minimum maximums. If it says our cancellation penalty is 2 months rent, if your lease says that, and the property is vacant the day after, my understanding is the tribunal decisions indicate that you can then pay that out. If the landlord then gets a new tenant from the 1st of May, my understanding is that it does not have to be refunded, because I believe that I asked that very, very specifically. Okay? I asked that very, very specifically. So I'm going to share this with you so that you can read this, that you can listen to this yourself. It is still mulling in my head a little bit, which is why I'm probably sound a little bit vague on this. This is brand new news. Let me just market my rental training club. This is the sort of information we will generally be dealing with in the rental training club. We deal with things like that. When I hear of anything new, then I get one of the lawyers on to explain it and things like that. So the rental training club is very, very useful for that. It's not stuff that we generally do public, because I don't want to confuse everybody else out there. There was another question. What about the prorated procurement fees that the landlord has to pay to the agency for finding a new occupant? That's from Lauren. So let's look at that question. What about the prorated procurement fees that the landlord has to pay to an agency for finding a new occupant? Okay, when it comes to procurement, and Ishmael does deal with it in that recording as well. As I say, just ignore the first half of that recording. I'm terrible with chopping up recordings, but you can fast forward most. It's a recording. So let's just go into that. So a landlord asks you to procure a tenant for them. Your job is completed once the procurement is done, and you are paid your procurement fee. And let's say, argument's sake, your procurement fee just happens to be a nice round 12,000 Rand, and you have procured a tenant for 12 months. So essentially, the landlord's paying you up front. I understand that, but essentially amortized, that means the landlord is essentially paying you for, paying you essentially R1,000 a month. Now that tenant gives early cancellation, and to make it easy for my head, which you notice is a bit confused sometimes, to make it easy for my head, the early termination falls exactly halfway. So it's at the 6-month mark, the tenant vacates legally based on early termination. Now the landlord has to re-tenant the property, and he finds a tenant for the very day after the old tenant leaves, and he pays a full procurement fee to the agent, because obviously agents do jobs and they're entitled to get paid, and we don't give discounts on procurement fees. It's not our fault. Parliament wrote the CPA the way they did. Now the question is, the landlord for the first 6 months was paying one procurement fee. For the next 6 months, where they got tenant number 2, in essence, they paid the procurement fee for tenant number 1, who's not there anymore, but that's prepaid. And they paid a procurement fee for tenant number 2, who's now the new tenant. So in essence, the landlord had paid a double procurement fee. Is the landlord entitled to say to tenant number 1, but you are now causing me extra costs, so now I want that money back? The short answer to that is yes. So money that they are out of pocket, so money that they are out of pocket. So in that particular case, yes, the landlord, if the landlord has advertising costs, etc. So if you deal with cancellation penalties the way we've always been dealing with it, with a minimum 1 month cancel, minimum whatever, a maximum 3 months cancellation penalty, and we have a normal situation with leases the way they've always been, then we can charge any loss of rent. But in this case, of course, the landlord has to do this, because we weren't charged to manage this. So the early cancellation is the landlord's problem. But technically, yes, the landlord can charge for any loss of rent, but the landlord's had no loss of rent, or any money they're out of pocket. And in this particular case, they would be out of pocket that 6 months prorated procurement fee, as well as any advertising costs they had if they did it themselves to advertise for a new tenant. So I hope that answers the question. My problem now comes in with this new system. I'm not sure how it works, so that I can't update you on at the moment. You're quite right, Sonia, that the landlord takes the risks, but if the tenant does leave early, but I mean, it's not something we would generally deal with. It would be the landlord's responsibility to deal with that. If the landlord wanted me to deal with it, then he should have got me to be the managing agent, would be my early answer. In the case procurement, the landlord he does take the risk, and it's the landlord's responsibility to go and claim that cancellation penalty and to do his whole deposit and all that stuff. I don't do that for a procurement landlord. But those are the sorts of things that you can explain to landlords to maybe convert them from what they believe they want a procurement service into a what do you call it? A managed service. A managed service. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now come into what I think, of course, is the most valuable part of this, but without the first part, the second part doesn't make any sense. Being the strange person that I am, I have written, because it's the only way I know how to do rentals. Rentals is organization. Rentals is processes. Rentals is set out under what you call it, legislation. Okay. So I've written a standard operating procedure, the most sexiest name you can ever get. I tend to call it a checklist, and we call it a rent pack. So let's have a look what it is. So let's go here. So basically, I've pre-written a checklist, which is legally compliant and I believe best practice, which you can then use to implement these processes and all this communication directly into your offices ASAP. I know there are a number of people on here who already have some of these checklists and can share with you the value of them. So this, I call it a rent pack. Okay, it has a checklist. We're going to go through this now, which is the early termination checklist, which is a central process document and contains references to the various landlord and tenant communications. I'm going to show you an example now. Then it has those 2 cheat sheets in it that I showed you. These are both PDFs. I don't allow those to be changed, and that's just simply because I know somebody changing it and doing something wrong, and then it's still got my branding on it. So for that reason, those 2 will just remain PDFs. But you then get, in this case, it's a smaller checklist. So it's got 3 landlord communication templates and 3 tenant communication templates. Why do I include these? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we forget what we know. We seriously forget what we know and how clever we are, because we do this every single day. But our landlords and our tenants don't always understand these things. So part of this is to give you templates to help you communicate with your landlords, explain to them why, and educate them in the process. So let's have a look at the cheat sheet. You will be getting an editable version of this so you can make it your own. Not the cheat sheet, sorry. I tell you what, the checklist. Now, unfortunately, this is going to open as a Word document, but that will be okay. We can deal with that. So here is the checklist. I'm just trying to move it over there. Sorry. There we are. So here's the checklist. And in the checklist, it gives guidelines, but what if you're in charge of the business, you can make that your company policy. And then it goes through step by step what should be done when. So here it starts off with notice received from the tenant must be responded to within 1 business day. That was my rule. Follow up for landlord instructions daily. Why? Because time is of the essence. You'll figure this all out. I don't sell these separately. Well, I used to sell these separately, but I don't. I used to then charge them as an add-on, but I don't do that anymore either. As long as you give us we're happy that no money changes hands. You give us a review, and you can have these, because I can't see how people can run without these. We may not accept verbal notice. Notice must be in writing. All those sorts of things. You can change these things. This you can change as you like. Okay. But importantly, you will see that here where it explains things. So confirm notice is valid. Remember, I showed you that cheat sheet with that flow diagram. That's the reference here. So when you're bringing on new team members, etc., this is perfect. If the notice is not valid, you will see that there's a thing called a T here, and there's a thing called an L here. These are what I call my communication templates. T for tenant, L for landlord, just so you understand it. And I always forget to say PC means process checklist. That's all it means. Why do I put these funny numbers here? Because it's much easier to search for a document on that than trying to put in early termination and getting 10 different ones you need to. So I'll tell you, I'm not just a pretty face now. I have a face for radio in any case. So if the notice is not valid, I give you email templates. When the valid notice is received, we've got email templates. Then we follow up with the landlord. When the landlord's instructions are received, we advertise the property as soon as possible. We update the landlord, we update the tenant, we update the billing, reverse any rent billed for any period after the cancellation date, ensure the lease end date is set to the date of cancellation, diarize to bill the cancellation penalty, but we can only do that in arrears. And then we have another checklist that it goes on to, which you won't be getting because it's not part of this, where we follow the exit process, because that tenant is now going through an exit process. So let's go here and let's start here. The tenant has given us notice and the notice is valid. We go to T013. You will be getting the, I've set up an email for you already. I'm trying to be clever these days. You will be getting the editable versions of this. We acknowledge receipt of your notice dated blah, blah, to cancel your current fixed term lease agreement early as permitted under Section 14 of the Consumer Protection Act. Under Section 14 of the Consumer Protection Act, you are required to give 20 business days notice of termination. Now, if you change to the new process, which you're going to get the bonus recording on, we'll need to change these. I haven't updated these yet because I'm still a bit gray on that process. So I still go under the old process. Under Section 14 of the CPA, you're required to give 20 business days notice of termination, which would make whatever the date is your last date. Why do I put this in here? Because not everybody can count 20 business days. I know that sounds stupid, but it's true. Can you please confirm that this is the date that you would like to terminate your lease? If not, please confirm a later date. Under the above section, you remain liable for the rent. So there's no misunderstanding. You remain liable for the rent and all other costs agreed to in the lease up to the last date of occupation. Furthermore, because I want the tenants to understand this, I don't want them fighting with me at the end when they don't get their full deposit back. Furthermore, the landlord is entitled to impose a reasonable cancellation penalty, which is usually accepted to be an amount to cover any amount that the landlord will be out of pocket. You can phrase this better, because of your early termination. As an important point to note in this regard is that most people looking for accommodation are looking to start leases at the start of a calendar month. We have found that where tenants have cancelled that the other stupid thing pops up, sorry. We have found that where tenants have cancelled their leases early and made the last day of a calendar month their last day of occupation, we have been more successful at re-tenanting the property immediately, resulting in the outgoing tenants not having to pay any cancellation penalty. In light of this, you may want to extend your notice to the end of the calendar month. Ladies and gentlemen, these are things we learn, and I've updated the processes and I've updated the documents. In order to fulfill our requirements under the CPA to use every endeavor to re-tenant the property, because this is our requirement, as soon as possible, and to minimize the possibility of you being liable for a cancellation penalty, we will be commencing advertising the property ASAP. Your rental consultant will be in touch soon to arrange a time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another common problem. I've built it all in. I've been there. I haven't been everywhere, but I've been there. There's no everywhere in rentals then. Understandably, we will also need to be able to show the property to interested prospective new tenants. Once again, the rental agent will be in touch to arrange suitable viewing times. And then I'm duplicating something there. Your cooperation in insisting us to show the property to as many prospective new tenants as possible maximizes the chances. You can highlight parts here, no? Of us getting the property re-tenanted or re-rented as soon as possible. Conversely, any unreasonable limitations or restrictions on allowing access to show the property will inevitably delay this process and increase the probability of you being responsible for cancellation penalty. So this is where maybe I'm biased. Yes, I am biased. But we are trying to explain to the tenants in their language. When I say in their language, I'm talking about money out of their pockets. We are trying to encourage them to cooperate with us so that we have a win-win for everybody. And so this has been updated over like 5 years. It doesn't mean I've added something every year. It just means when things happen, and I've thought to myself, how can I try and avoid that? Okay, so we go back to, let me just go back there. So that's what the tenant gets when we got valid notice. That's the tenant's one. Then there's the landlord's one. And so the last one I'm going to go through with you. There we are. We have received notice from your tenant to terminate their current fixed-term lease agreement early. Section 14 of the Consumer Protection Act allows tenants to terminate their lease agreement early on 20 business days' notice, as long as they fulfill all of the requirements applicable. The tenant has fulfilled all of the requirements. Under the same section of the CPA, I'm educating. If you are doing this, and another thing is, if you are doing this throughout your processes, then the landlord is also, I believe, seeing your value. And there's less chance of these people leaving you at the end of a lease and not asking you to continue, because they're going to, they're like, my God, this is complicated. So this is part of implementing this. Under the same section of the CPA, you're entitled to impose a reasonable cancellation penalty, or you may be entitled, is really. It is our experience and advice that the amount of such a cancellation penalty would be limited to any amount you are out of pocket because of the early termination of the lease. Furthermore, to ensure you are entitled to claim such a penalty, we need to use our best endeavors to seek a replacement tenant. Now that you've been through what we've been through this morning, you'll understand, you'll be able to answer all the questions the landlords have here. And that's why I don't want to give them to people that don't understand them. In line with the above, we seek your urgent permission to advertise the property for rent as soon as possible on the same terms and conditions as the current lease. Any changes to the terms and conditions, for example, the rent or the remaining period, could jeopardize your entitlement. We look forward to receiving your instructions, etc., etc. Please note that time is of the essence, as we need to advertise the property ASAP. So, ladies and gentlemen, this, I believe, is absolutely critical and a huge, huge, huge difference in our training, because we give, when it comes to these complicated processes, we give you this. This helps you. This helps guide your staff. One thing I know from rentals, because unlike a lot of other trainers, I've been there, done that. Agents have a problem focusing, not because of them, because of all the disturbances. By disturbances, I mean the phones ringing. Everybody, you can't tell them, listen, I'll get back to you soon, or you don't answer because it's an emergency. It's an emergency. It's always an emergency. No? So it's so easy to miss something. It's so easy. So when one has something like a checklist where you can tick off, also if you keep these on file and there's ever a dispute later, or you end up in the tribunal because somebody says you didn't explain something to them, this is perfect, absolutely perfect to cover your behind, So I think it's invaluable. Yeah, everything's an emergency. Everything is an emergency. Do we build Okay. Oh, thank you, Laura. I know, Lauren, you wrote me the most amazing thingy testimonial once about, and I must start using it as well. Of course, you're welcome to well, I'd like you to update it on this particular one. Have saved me every time, says Lauren, every month for sure. Lauren has been using these. Do we bill cancellation penalties as cancellation penalties or holding over damages? We bill them, Robin, as cancellation penalties. Holding over damages is when somebody overstays their welcome. We'll deal with that. We'll deal with that in another training. But just so everybody knows, I'm not confusing everybody. Holding over damages is when somebody becomes what we call an illegal occupant. In other words, they don't leave, they overstay their welcome. Oh, Tracy, technically, okay. Tracy said remaining period. Tracy was listening to me when I was reading that letter. remaining period. Surely you must advertise for another full 12-month period, not just what is left of the cancelled lease. It says on the same terms and conditions. It says on the same terms and conditions. You can ignore that, take that out of the letter. I think that's the easiest way to deal with it. We must just take the same terms and conditions and just say, i.e. rent. I'll update it for the next version. Sorry that I confused. How do you join the rental club? I will send out the link. I did start doing an online process for that, but there is a sort of an online process. RTC info. I will send out a link to the page where you send in your info and then we get in touch with you. Thank you so much. Does the landlord forfeit his right to cancellation penalty, even if specified in lease, i.e. 1 month, if he decides not to re-tenant the property but decides to sell? I would guess the answer is yes, because he is not re-advertising on the same. Okay, let me start this one. And I think this one's going to tire me some, Katie. Does the landlord forfeit his right to a cancellation penalty, even if specified in lease, i.e. 1 month, if he decides not to re-tenant the property but decides to sell? I would guess the answer is yes, because he is not re-advertising on the same terms. He would, however, nonetheless still be out of pocket because of the tenant's unexpected early termination. Sue, I have to congratulate you, because this is the question that I've always feared the most. Well, not feared the most. It's actually a question that's actually never come up in a live training before. But fortunately, Sue, I have had a situation like this. The answer is no, he doesn't forfeit his right to a cancellation penalty. Let me give you an example. We had a property that was tenanted for a 12-month period. The landlord put the property on the market, and the property was sold. They teed up the date of occupation for the buyer to coincide with the date of termination of the tenants. I hope I can explain this by way of an example. It's going to be best. There was, so everything was going to be fine. The tenant was going to leave one day and the new buyer was taken over the next day. That was all fine. However, in this particular case, the tenant was looking to buy a property and the tenant found a property and the tenant bought a property. But the tenants then didn't tee up their occupation date with the new landlord. With the new buyer or with the landlord or with the end of the lease. They didn't tee it up, with the end of their lease. So what happened was the tenant came to me and happened to be a colleague, a real estate agent, and said to me, Sean, we're going to move out, blah, blah. And I said, you know, that's an early termination. You are going to be responsible for a termination penalty. And they went off at me as tenants do, whether they are colleagues or not. So I did at that point, we were in Marlon Chevalier's Rental Retainer Club, and I messaged him and I said, I'm a bit confused now, because how do I deal with this? Because we have to fulfill the requirements. We have to use our best endeavors to minimize our loss. That's actually what it says. I've translated it to re-tenant the premises, but it says to mitigate your loss. But in this particular case, I mean, the landlord could advertise for 3 months. Is that using his best endeavors to mitigate his loss? And the advice that I was given at the time, and subsequent to this, when I've had situations like this, I've been given the same advice, is that in all probability, the landlord is not going to get it re-tenanted. So we believe you can charge a fixed fee, but you cannot charge for the full period of the vacancy due to these circumstances. And the guideline I was given was to charge half. So I went back to my colleague and said, that's fine. I've spoken to the lawyer, who was Marlon, and I have cleared it with them, you would be able to terminate your lease legally, but you would be, and I've spoken to the landlord, of course, because everything comes through the landlord. I forget about that a lot when I'm training. And you would be liable for a 1.5 months cancellation penalty. And of course, they went off with me again, and said they'll think about it. But that was the guidance I was given. So if you are in a situation like that, and by the way, all Rental Training Club members can also message me at any point in time for guidance. And if necessary, I contact the lawyers that I have on speed dial to get some advice. So no, they don't automatically forfeit their right to the cancellation penalty, okay? But it's not automatically for everything. It is really, Lauren, as you say, it's very much a case-by-case basis. What actually happened in my story, just to prove to you that I don't make these stories up, what happened to me in my story was that the colleague actually went and advertised for somebody for 3 months, and believe it or not, she found someone who was just looking for something for 3 months, and we gave her permission to subtenant, so nobody was out of pocket. So that's how that one ended. But it does not necessarily mean, that they forfeit their right. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, I keep on thinking to myself, everybody says, Sean, you must be mad doing 2-hour sessions. And I say, you know, I am mad. And I mean, I think that's probably a fact. There's probably something on paper somewhere saying that. But how can I explain these things in less than that sort of session? It's really, there's so much to cover. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you profusely for spending your time with us this morning. I want to thank you profusely for investing in this training, and for your support. We really, really do appreciate it.